So hi, everyone. I'm
Are
Todd
you?
Fernandez with Climate Crisis Policy and the Earth Bill Network. I was previously Massachusetts Governor's Ombudsman and a Legislative Director for Economic Affairs. And I also led the effort to get the Equality Act introduced in Congress, which is the Gay Civil Rights Bill. And now I lead a grassroots, all-volunteer nationwide network that has introduced and plans to pass the Earth Bill, which we call a 2030 Moonshot for Earth. The formal name of the bill is the Earth Act to Stop Climate Pollution by 2030, HR 598. This is a flagship bill with real solutions and mandates on industry to stop climate pollution on a deadline as science requires. It's designed to inspire and unify the movement and the public so that we have enough power to change the political status quo and make Congress act. This bill is the answer to how we get off of fossil fuels. We all know time has run out. The carbon clock says we have less than 6 years more of our current pollution levels before we surpass the amount of pollution that will lock in 1.5 degrees Celsius warming, and then 23 years before the 2 degrees. Different parties have come out recently saying it's too late for 1.5. Some are saying it's too late for 2. However you crunch these numbers, we know we're very late in this game and we have to expedite our action. The Carbon Action Tracker sort of put a clarity on this by saying we need 80% renewables by 2030 to keep heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius. That was recently. And then the global stocktake from the IPCC also urged major reductions this decade by 2030. As we all know, the destruction has begun. The trajectory is terrifying, and we must have policy to accelerate our emissions reductions, and Congress is the only hope there. The Earth Bill presents the policy solution that we've sort of been avoiding in the discussions of what we're going to do, and it sets mandates on industry. So that's the paradigm shift that put mandates industry in law. And the Earth Bill calls for 100% by 2030 in 3 areas: renewable electricity by utility companies, zero emission vehicles from car manufacturers, and regenerative agriculture from publicly traded agriculture corporations, which we colloquially call Big Ag. These are 3 consensus solutions that all the international scientists and policy experts in the United States have agreed upon. Everyone is calling for these 3 items. There's also a tight consumer connection to them because this is electricity, cars, and food. 3 consumer items, 3 kitchen table issues. It's each month a lot of our money goes to pay for these 3 items. And so it's our money and our pollution, really. And this is makes it our right and our duty to make Congress act. We have a great list of co-sponsors already. Happy to show that list. It's I'm not going to name them all, but you can see here it's a very diverse group. Representative Espaillat from New York 13 is the lead sponsor, and then we have 10 other co-sponsors at present from New York, Illinois, Texas, and Arizona. The Earth Bill will have real emission reductions that meet the U.S. Paris Accord goals and domesticate that treaty, effectively putting in law and domestic and national law policies that will achieve these goals. Experts from Project Drawdown did the analysis of the bill. They're now with an entity called Regenerative Intelligence, and they determined that the bill will have an additional 40% greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2030 from 2005 levels, and then an additional 50% by 2050. So if you do the math, we're on the current trajectory right now is about 21% reductions from 2005 levels. If you add the 40% to that, that's 60% by 2030, and that's how you meet the Paris Accord goals. It's important to note that mandates, and we're going to talk about the mandates in a second, but the mandate approach to this gives real certainty to the emission reductions that doesn't really exist necessarily from the IRA and the laissez-faire voluntary incentives that were created there. So the IRA is marked on this graph, but the Earth Bill will create certainty to those reductions, and they complement one another really quite well. The IRA is incentives for clean energy and for consumer purchases of efficient appliances, et cetera, and zero emission vehicles. So that's on the demand side. And then the Earth Bill creates a certainty that the supply will be required and available. This slide talks about how the Earth Bill works in practice. So it stops pollution at the factory. And that's really the different paradigm shift and the urgency that we're trying to get across to policymakers. This stops pollution at the factory, at the source of the pollution. It requires an industry-led, smooth, 7-year transition. So the way the bill works is that within 1 year, the utility companies, the car manufacturers, and Big Ag have to come up with a plan that will show us what it will look like for them to make this transition over the relevant period of time. And from those plans, we will all see as a society what those companies can do, what the holes are in terms of the transition, and what's necessary that government do, and what we need to do as a society collectively to help implement those plans. Importantly, the mandates unleash private investment to build on scale and on time. And this is critical. Everyone's clamoring for private sector investment. But once you put mandates in law, then you have a guaranteed demand for renewable energy. And so all those projects can get financing. And that really is the linchpin we need to build at scale and on time, as I said. And it's what everyone's clamoring for at the international level, but no one has a mechanism to really motivate that private investment. And this will do that. The plans get submitted to government, as I mentioned, and then we'll all see the plans and it will become an all of society push. These transitions are already in motion. They're already economically more viable. We have renewable portfolio standards in 30 states. Ford Motors in England is a nice example. England has a 2030 deadline for no more internal combustion engines. And Ford has started to invest in that to achieve that goal. And recently, the government there started floating the idea of postponing those deadlines, pushing them back. And Ford Motor Company raised a huge stink that made the news, saying, no, wait a minute, you have these deadlines. We've already invested heavily to achieve them. We're on track. Don't change the deadlines. So it shows how mandates really are businesses' best friends. And these are clear rules in government, clear rules in law that give predictability to the business sector, which is really what they seek. And it's frankly the conservative pro-business approach that Republicans usually embrace. Regenerative agriculture, there's a growing body of evidence that this we can have the same yields, that is cheaper for farmer, that uses less water and other inputs. So these are all positive impacts. There's no downside to them, and it speeds it all up and makes it mandatory. The Earth Bill's real contribution is a movement strategy to unify the environmental movement and civil society more broadly, and then the public at large, so that we have a critical mass and power to achieve what's been impossible so far, which is to move the political status quo and to overcome basically the resistance from big oil and big ag. So the hope is that Big Greens will align on this, and we're making progress on that. Earth Justice just endorsed the bill, Interfaith Power and Light just endorsed. We're in conversations with NRDC and the League of Conservation Voters about a Senate version. These are huge turning points that we've been dreaming about for some time that are now coming to fruition. So that's very exciting. Then once we unify the environmental movement, in which there are hundreds, if not thousands of groups that care about this topic, Then we will have a full court press from that front, which will start to change what's possible. And that will lead us to be able to bring civil society more broadly on board. So academia, all the universities, business organizations, legal associations, and all sorts of other associations like sports groups, etc. Then the next task is to mobilize the public, and these things build on top of each other, of course, and we're expecting and hoping for celebrity-inspired grassroots participation at that point. Already the Big Greens have access to a list of celebrities that are interested in this topic. Once they endorse it and get civil society on board, the celebrities will follow, and that will bring the public on board. Fortunately, polling is already in the right zone. Over 70% of the public are in favor of the kinds of transitions that the Earth Bill puts forward. There are various polls that show that. And there's even strong support on both parties. So Republican, there's strong, moderate, and even conservative Republican for certain things, but getting to renewable electricity, zero emission vehicles, and then protecting the soil, those all have very strong public support already. I mentioned a two-party focus. This is a very important part of our networks strategy in the gay rights movement. I would talk to our community about this. We were also very aligned with the Democratic Party for decades, of course. And I would explain to them, you can't have a one-party movement and a two-party system. And as it turned out with the equality movement, most of our legislative victories had bipartisan support. And the most recent victory in the Senate, protecting marriage equality, had 10 Republican senators that supported it. When we started talking about a bipartisan movement in the 90s, it was, extremely controversial and not well received, but that was the right strategy and has played out incredibly well beyond our wildest expectations. So I believe that capacity and potential exists in this arena as well. And we are definitely targeting Republican districts. We've identified about 20 where they've had severe storms and others where there are swing districts in play. And we're making a full court press in New York 17 with Representative Mike Lawler. And we're particularly interested in this arena from the faith community because, so we're working lots of faith connections in New York 17, but beyond. And the belief is that faith community is already bipartisan. And right across the pew in almost every religious institution or place of worship, there are Republicans. So that community is already established. And so we want to leverage that, our relationships there from the environmental activists in those communities to reach across the pew and get their Republican friends and community members on board to help us go after Republican support. This bill, to help with the solidarity and the unity that we're talking about, it draws a bright line and it puts those industries on one side of the bright line, and then it puts consumers and voters and small businesses and all other corporations, basically the rest of us, on the other side of the line. And so it doesn't require consumer action or and hopefully no price increases, but the change is at the factory. So that enables us to have unity and not get embroiled in into fights among us. And it's a very simple and clean bill to understand, 15 pages. And that's all intentional to use it as an educational tool, primarily for activists. And then with the consumers and the public, it'll be a little simpler. We'll keep it to clean electricity, cars, and food. And we have to make it as simple as possible so folks can understand it and connect to it. Because one thing that it's very clear is that this has been an intentionally convoluted and complicated arena and conversation designed to keep us confused so that we can't take action, we can't move forward. And the Earth Bill is very strategically designed to address that. Mm-hmm. The political strategy is extremely important because that's where the logjam is. We know we have the technology, we know economics are in our favor. The trajectory is clear in terms of these transitions to these three items, but the block is politics. And everyone sort of knows that, but the question has been, well, how do we break through the politics? And I believe that you have to have a political litmus test that calls the question of the candidates. So the Earth Bill specifically for that, and our action going forward is designed for this. We have to elect more pro-planet Congress members, and we need to know their position on policy, specifically policy that has mandates on industry to make the transition on a timeline. So this bill presents a very clear choice. Are you for the pollution or are you for the planet? And by having a bill that calls that, we can then know if we're electing the right people. And we've here to this point, we've really not crystallized that demand in a way that calls this question. And that's why this political status quo has been, has continued as it has for all these decades when we knew it was a problem. Pollution is now the Achilles heel of big oil and big ag. And whereas they have reigned supreme really for decades and controlled the political arena, there's real exposure here now. And they know it, everyone knows it. So I think we have an opportunity if we unite to finally prevail over their power in Congress. And this also presents a real chance to retake our democracy. We have a democracy teetering on teetering democracy in terms of the oligarchy's control and the Republican Party's adherence to the oligarchy. And they're willing to really overtake democracy completely to retain that power. So this bill really calls that question. Are you for the oligarchy? Are you for legislating in the general welfare? And legislating in the general welfare is the constitutional mandate for Congress. And when you say we're now going to retake the power to establish our pollution laws to save the planet in the best interests of our public welfare, we are calling that question as well. And when we unite around the climate crisis, I think the fear and the numbers are there on our side to derive finally sort of a slingshot political solution. I think of it as the David and Goliath example. And David had a slingshot, and that was a very precise, powerful mechanism that he could use with precision across great distances. And the Earth Bill is sort of like that slingshot. And the power of the slingshot is the power of all of our organizations and the public who are terrified. And if you combine that with a very focused bill that gets at the pollution, I think we're going to prevail. No other bill calls this question. And again, this is, I believe, how we change the political status quo, which is the task at hand. There's an Earth Bill network that is developed to support the bill. Over 800 activists nationwide have pledged support individually. Over 130 groups, many faith groups, many faith groups. As I mentioned, Laudato Si movement has recently endorsed. Earth Justice has endorsed Interfaith Power and Light. And relevant to this community, the Unitarian Universalist Ministry for Earth, the Ministry for Social Justice, and a Just Economic Community. As I mentioned, we're in negotiations now for a Senate version of the bill with NRDC and League of Conservation Voters. That's very exciting, a conversation that's in play and in earnest, and they're on board with the idea that we need a bill and just now talking around some of those substantive things. Importantly, groups are already running with the bill. The bill's designed as a tool that any organization can take and run with. And Creation Justice Ministries is a great example. They did a call to action for people to write their congressperson about the bill months ago, and other groups have done the same thing. And this is really important because I believe it's sort of impossible to centrally coordinate a movement of this scale and the scale of action that we need. So you have to have a tool that empowers everyone to take it and run with it as they see fit. And once you have the collective demand, the shared demand, then everyone can use their own tactics, their own wording, their own communities, and their own approaches as they feel comfortable to push it. And then when you have that independent action, but from hundreds of thousands of groups, that's where you have real political power. Here's just a small list of some of the groups. It starts to make a beautiful tapestry. Next action steps for the network, we're looking for co-sponsors. every day. We're organizing by congressional district. We're asking all organizations that endorse the bill to please consider organizing by congressional district. But the real ask is for you to ask your members to seek co-sponsorship from their congresspeople. And we're doing this in a variety of districts, but there are 435 of them, so obviously it's a big list. Once we get Big Green on board better, I believe they'll be able to bring in around 100, 150 sort of easily. I'm guessing, estimating, and then that'll help to narrow our collective focus increasingly. And as we get more and more, then we'll be able to concentrate our collective effort on the outstanding groups. And at a certain point, the inside movement and traditional lobbying will have done as much as it can. And I believe it will take groups like Indivisible and Extinction Rebellion and all of us going into a mass protest and direct action mode to get it over the finish line. In New York State, we had a bill. I was arrested 3 times. We had massive protests at the State House. I believe ultimately that's what it's going to take to push this bill over the finish line. So that's the co-sponsor hunt. Outreach is the mode that we're in now. And so we're asking everybody to ask every group that you have relationships with to endorse the bill. And the idea here is that we have to really make this a common call, common demand, and we have to build awareness of the bill right now. And we're making progress. Our own list is quite extensive, and I can tell you that every major environmental organization and a lot of venture capital firms and a huge swath of media are paying attention and reading the emails about the Earth Bill. We just have to move people from watching to endorsing, and from endorsing to mobilization and action. And it's tricky because some groups will say, well, the bill's not ready for a vote now. So, and a lot of entities like to work on what's right in front of them. And this is, I would normally call this as a long-term plan, but it's not a long-term plan for something like this. And this next year of building the momentum and getting the snowball rolling is critical to queuing it up for action in the short term, hopefully in 2025. So outreach now is critical. It's the most important thing folks can do, and it's pretty straightforward. And then public awareness will be the next phase, and that'll be next year. And during the election cycle, using the election cycle to get people interested, to get candidates interested, to get the public aware, so that all of this is getting it on the agenda. And so this is the runway we have, and we're inviting everyone to join the organizing. We have a faith meeting on the 3rd Wednesday of each month at noon. And then we have a general meeting on Monday nights bi-weekly. And I can put those links in the chat after we're done. But I encourage everyone to go to the website, earthbill.org, and you'll see all of this. So in summary, the Earth Bill has consensus solutions, has industry mandates, which is the real mantra we want everyone to start talking about, industry mandates. It has real and certain emission reductions. It serves as a political litmus test to call that question. It's designed to unify the movement and public for real political power. And all of this is designed to make Congress act. Our timeline is 2023. We've been very busy unifying the big greens, and we're happy that that is coming to fruition. Next year, it'll be election cycle, and that'll be a full court press and public awareness. And regardless of how the election turns out, in 2025, it'll be time to push for passage collectively. So this is our goal. We want to save the future together. I personally think it's feasible. I've never seen more people and more organizations caring and working on something than I see in this arena. And I think the potential is really there. Once you have a bill that people believe in with real solutions, then you have a movement. And once you have a movement, you have hope. And I think that's where we are with the Earth Bill. And I'm very grateful for everyone's support and excited about collaborating going forward. Thank you very much.